this is Cindy from Cindy's Library, and while it wasn't on my list for April, I decided I had to read it. And that is Arthurian Voices by Verlyn Flieger. Those of you in Tolkien studies know she is an extremely well-respected Tolkien scholar. She edited Smith of Wootton Major. She edited on fairy stories. She edited the story of Corvolum, all of which we will be getting to at one point or another. And she's written many essays collected into various books: Interrupted Music, Splintered Light, Green Suns, There Would Always Be a Fairy Tale. It seems like I'm missing one major one, but in any case, yes, she has written much on Tolkien. But she is also a novelist. She's written several novels, and this isn't exactly a novel per se, but it is her latest fictional offering. And as it says, Arthurian Voices. Now, I have to talk about the Arthurian cycle first. I have a bit of a complicated relationship with Arthur. There are many aspects I love of it. Don't love the love triangle so much. Oh, yeah. The French just had to add Sir Lancelot. Oh, what can I say? I prefer the earlier Germanic versions in some ways. Although then you don't get the Grail story, and that truly would be sad. So, catch-22, I guess. I listened to part of Verlyn Flieger's class on Arthur for Signum University. That is how I know some of this, even though it's been a bit of a while, but she showed us some of the early triads, went through some early Welsh poems, and some later ones, which are included in the Magnum Oblivion, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and of course, what's his name? Geoffrey of Monmouth, who wrote the History of the Kings of Britain, which is basically the Arthur story, and it is quite interesting. And then after that, you have the French tradition in Chrétien de Troyes. Apologies to any French speakers. I'm only familiar with Portuguese, not French. But that is a major medieval French version. Or rather, he wrote major medieval French versions. And that is where Lancelot enters into the Arthur cycle. And then a few hundred years later, you have Malory in England. He collected all the stories and translated them into, not quite sure whether you would put it as late Middle English or early modern English. He's easier to understand than Chaucer for modern English speakers, but he's not quite as easy as Shakespeare. So anyway, it's quite possible to read him in the original even, but he literally threw every Arthurian legend he could find in the kitchen sink, basically, including Tristan and Isolde, right in the middle. And I have tried twice and never gotten past Tristan and Isolde. Now granted, life was a bit complicated during the middle of when the Mythgard Institute with the Tolkien professor was going through Mallory's completed works, but even so, I still got stuck on Tristan and Isolde again, and this is with the help of the Tolkien professor. I think my only hope in order to understand fully the whole courtly love thing is to read, I forget what book it is off the top of my head, but C.S. Lewis's first major book that was not poetry he was trying to publish in his early academic days was exactly on this subject. If C.S. Lewis can't get me through, I might have to give up. I might go back and do Tennyson, though. That would be possible, and I really should finish that Signum class on Arthur. I've still got all the audio files. And yet, I love Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and Tolkien did too. He did his own translation, which was actually published in his lifetime. So, yeah, gotta love Arthur. And why there's some problematic parts. Really, Queen Guinevere gets a bad rap, especially after Lancelot is included in the whole cycle. I mean, before Lancelot, Arthur went off to fight the Romans, and it's not her fault she got trapped in her palace all by herself while her husband was away by Mordred, who may be a nephew or something else, we aren't sure. Anyway, bringing this back to Arthurian Voices, there are two parts to this. The first one is Avilion, a romance of voices. And so this is basically the whole Arthurian story based on the Mallory's cycle, except it's short snippets, and it's, of course, it's put in modern day words, but oh, a good example. Each chapter is from a different viewpoint. And so we get a chapter on how Gorlois feels about Uther starting to hit on his wife during a visit. We get a chapter on Ingraine's perspective. We get Merlin's perspective and Kay's perspective, Brecon and Agravain, and Morgan and Morgause and Elaine and their voice is used at exactly the point of the Arthur story where it would have most impact. A good example of this would be Bedivere, who of course was the one as Arthur was dying from his last battle, asked Bedivere to throw the sword he had gotten from the Lady of the Lake into the lake, and Bedivere had a little trouble doing that. How was I supposed to know? He didn't tell me what to expect. I don't suppose I would have believed him even if he had. In any case, he didn't. He just gave me the order, an order so insane I knew he was off his head. I had suspected that anyway. And that gives you an idea of how this goes. There are some interesting parts. Ones like Bedivere are fun. Unfortunately, there are a lot of perspectives where frankly all they can think about is women and what they are going to do with those women, whether they are already married or not. To be fair, there are a few, from the woman's perspective, that are, well, let's just say, for example, that Margot's has no problem that she's left with her half-brother Arthur. To be fair, they didn't know they were half-siblings at the time, but so yeah, very uncomfortable. But I came to a revelation while reading this, and that is, well, let's just say it's based on Merlin's second and the final part of the story. Well, except for a few quotes from Mallory, but the story careens its way along that slippery path and carries us all along it. It's a fine story, the best of them all, but no matter how many times it's told, it always comes out the same way. Given every possible chance to choose wisely, the people in it always choose foolishly. They follow their own stubborn immediate desires, they fall into the same traps, they make the same stupid, willful, wrong decisions. They fall in love indiscriminately, they couple without care and breed without responsibility. They kill without looking, they refuse to see what's right in front of them. They invariably ignore the warnings, over and over and over. And yet, I don't know. Maybe that's the very thing that makes this story so unforgettable, that keeps it living. The fugitive built in the hope that human endeavor need not always be in vain, that this time things will be different. This time, the people in the story will heed the warnings and make the right choices, be sensible for once in their lives, as if sense had anything to do with tragedy. But maybe that's the reason all the poets have to try their hands at it. Maybe that's what keeps people coming back to this one story time after time, century after century after century, while 100 other stories molder untold for want of an audience. Still, I wonder, is it the people who come back to the story because they need it and won't let it die? Or is it the story that of its own will keeps coming back to the people to show them what they are, because people must be made to see themselves, for if they cannot see how they are, they will never try to be better. Could that be how the final rumor got started, that persistent whisper echoing from age to age that he did not die, that he will come again? And that if he does, maybe this time, just for once, they will get it right. And I think Ferlin Flieger, through the voice of Merlin, has finally put her finger on something for me. Why do we come back to the Arthurian stories so much? Because we want them to get it right this time. That's the whole thing about the once and future king idea. They got it wrong the first time, so of course Arthur has to come back, and we have to do it right this time. And that means I'm never going to be able to completely let the Arthurian version go. And why should I? There are some wonderful things in there, wonderful characters, wonderful stories, wonderful lessons to learn. But I make no promises about Mallory. The other story in here is The Bargain, a comedy of voices, which is a modern retelling of, you guessed it, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Oh, and this one I enjoyed a lot more. There are still some references, but they aren't quite as blatant overall, I would say. And it's just funny. Let's see. Oh, uh, this is from Scene 4, The Wildwood. Let's just say Gawain spends a bit of time traveling, trying to find the castle of the Green Giant, whose head he cut off, and whose challenge he accepted. Ah, it's raining again, and it's Christmas Eve. Not very merry. If I was one of those sugar knights like they decorate the Christmas cakes with, I'd have melted into syrup by now. Jaunting, he called it. I'd like to see him try it. Now it's changing to sleet. That last strip down the nose of my helmet is turning into an icicle. A fine picture I must make, wet and shivering, and ice dripping off my nose. I'm glad the fellows aren't here to see. It's beginning to get dark. Another night camping out. No fire, with the wood too wet to burn. The wind's blowing into all the chinks in my armor. Why can't there be a nice warm inn somewhere in this forsaken forest? A cup of mulled wine would go down well about now. A mug of good hot ale would be even better. And then a thick cut off the joint rimmed with fat, with plenty of dripping to salt the bread in, and a pretty girl for later. Yep, Gawain's having a hard time that night. Weather's not the best. Oh, and I have to give you one from the Lord and Lady. Ah, Lady, a sporting proposition. Clever of you putting it in those terms. They're all fools for a challenge, but it's not like you to give up the advantage. Just how sporting did you make it? Lord, oh, I made it seem worthwhile. I brandished the axe aloft so they could all see it while the women twittered and the men gasped. Lady, you enjoyed that. Lord, I found it gratifying. Then I said, any man who dares may deal me a blow with this axe. They began to quiet down at that. I'll take it without flinching, I told them, provided I may return the favor, stroke for stroke. That's how I put it. Lady, that doesn't sound sporting to me. If they'd known you as I do, they'd have guessed right away it was a loaded proposition. Lord, I thought it sounded fair. After all, I left it up to them what stroke to choose. Of course, with an axe, there's the obvious one. Chop! There goes the head. Lady. And they fell for it? Lord, well, no, as a matter of fact, they didn't. Not right away. At first there was, how shall I put it, a pregnant pause while my words sank in. Lady, a speaking silence. I can just hear what they didn't say. Lord, it was loud and clear. No one would meet my eyes. They were too busy looking at each other or staring at the floor. Lady, I can imagine. They're really cowards, all of them. Lord, I let the silence grow just long enough to make them uncomfortable, and then I hit them right between the eyes. Lady, lovely. And what did you hit them with? Lord, contempt, scorn, contumely. First I looked all around the hall, slowly, and then I said, what a bunch of lily-livered sissies. Lady, sissies is nice, but lily-livered is delicious. A direct hit right into reputation. That must have roused them. Lord, I thought it was rather good, but it wasn't good enough. If you can imagine it, they just sat there staring at me as if they couldn't believe their ears. Lady, they're not very bright, are they? Oh, yes, yes, yes. I love Sir Bersilac and his lady. They're fun. And the ironic thing is in the story of the Green Knight, Grain, for all his reputation as a ladies' guy, is forced to walk an extremely fine line between following the rules of courtly love and not doing what he should. So, if you're an Arthur fan, you may find this collection very, very interesting. This Arthurian Voices by Berlin Flieger. I am glad I read it. Anyway, although I do warn you, there's a bit of language, most of it modified though to more old time. And yeah, there's plenty of discussion of sexual things, unfortunately, which is rather uncomfortable for me personally. For you, your mileage may vary, but I'm still glad I read it. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say on this episode of Cindy's Library. Thank you for stopping by. Feel free to leave comments down below if you have anything you'd like to share. If you have read Arthurian Voices, I would love to hear what you think about it. And until next time, I hope we all stay safe and healthy, and happy reading.